And the first topic of today is the relationship between being trans and being autistic. Because, as some of you are probably aware, this is quite a common narrative that's put out there by transphobic folk as sort of a way to, sorry, sort of a way to delegitimize trans people. It's seen as a way sort of to attack them and sort of cast doubt on legitimacy of their identity. To do this, transphobes have argued that the higher prevalence of autism in the trans community is evidence that it's really a delusion or that it's a result of brainwashing. Now, there's sort of a lot to unpack here. It also links to the whole notion of rapid onset gender dysphoria, which was forwarded. This whole notion of being trans is sort of contagious. And they would very often note, a lot of the teens who are trans are also autistic, therefore being autistic is causing this transness to spread, etc. And there's sort of several base assumptions here. One of them is this assumption of ignorance on behalf of autistic people. This argument is kind of based on the idea that I'm trying to put my thoughts together. I'm really sorry. It's sort of based on the whole idea that autistic people can't competently think for themselves. That they're impressionable people. They can be misled very easily. You can take advantage of them, etc. I caught trans, I blame you, Ethel. We all do. Everyone blames me. They should, okay? I can take the blame. They assume that there's this whole basis of if you're autistic, you don't have the capacity to sort of understand these complex topics like gender, which then lends itself to this removal of autonomy. And we do see this quite a bit in ableist rhetoric, the whole idea of, oh, well, autistic people can't, make decisions about their own well-being and, their own life, etc. They're all, this is how the ableist people see, they're all mindless children. There's this narrative that the autistic people are children, pretty much. Which does also say something about the way we perceive children, etc., and that's rather questionable as well. But the point is, this rhetoric, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make a coherent point, and I feel like I'm kind of flailing all over the place.
Now you're down to my level of just constantly shredding water
down
through
to your
brain
level. You do make a coherent point, but I'm sorry.
That's because I basically write out an entire speech in advance because I can't trust my brain to focus for more than 2 seconds.
But anyway, we get the sense. Transphobes present autistic people as being incapable of understanding a topic. They don't have the ability to have autonomy over their own body, etc. Which, is grounded in gaslighting, turning to a trans person and saying, you're not trans, you've just been misled. And very often they'll paint this as autistic people are these vulnerable people who we need to save from the trans agenda.
That's how you're gonna work the plugin? That's how you're gonna do it?
No, they try to God damn it. Okay, this virus is messing with my mind now. It takes my sense of taste, and now it takes my mind. But anyway, yes.
Yes, the virus took your mind. That's what they want you to believe.
Yeah. And the argument, of course, is being autistic results in them being trans. Now, there's a number of issues with this. For one, this ignores survivorship bias. If you don't know what survivorship bias is a fallacy in which one ignores the process of selection a sample has gone through, if you will. The famous example people turn to is in World War II. Engineers were looking at, airplanes, etc., seeing where they got shot, and deciding, okay, we need to put armor in the places where they get shot. The issue with this is that's not true, because the planes that made it back after being shot in these areas were the planes that were still structurally sound. It's the planes that didn't make it back that you need to actually focus on, because they're the ones that got shot in other areas, went down, never made it back. And so they had to completely reverse the outlook on everything. With regards to autism and being trans, there is a selection bias involved in the fact that if someone is seeing a professional for autism or seeing a professional for gender dysphoria, then they are in a clinical environment which is more likely to notice the signs of the other. So if they're having their gender dysphoria, checked by a professional, they might also notice, hey, you do realize your child shows signs of synesthesia, or things like that. That's where one sensory input is incorrectly given a different sensory output. As an example, when I eat raw tomatoes, I physically see green. It's difficult to explain. I see green, the color green. I don't. It's something about raw tomatoes, peppers, that family. There is something in them that does this to me. That's synesthesia.
So that's what you mean when you say they taste green.
Yeah, it's like physically, it feels like I'm being hit in the face by a green bat. So like they're more likely to notice these things, and the same for children who are being, assessed and hopefully supported in, being neurodivergent. It's possible that professional may go, hey, you do realize that this child is showing constant signs of identifying with the opposite gender or a different gender. Have you considered the fact that they might be trans? So there's that selection process going on. This isn't a case of, oh, we did like random telephone sampling, etc., and all of that. These are people being funneled towards specialists who are also finding out that they might have another variance. So it ignores that. That's one of the big ones we've had for a very long time. However, in actually working on this, I knew what I was going to look into. I wanted to look specifically at social resistance. For those that don't know, one of the things about many autistic people is they're very good at resisting peer pressure, and that is on a societal level. I actually had previous experience of this as someone who has been in the secular community for a long time. If you did not know, there is a correlation between being atheist and being autistic. And I have seen religious people, theist apologists, argue along the similar basis as transphobes that this is a sign that, being an atheist is childlike, etc. Only the mentally ill, as they like to put it, the mentally ill would believe in atheism, etc. So it's just blatant ableism. And when you actually look into the reasons there's a correlation between being autistic and being atheist, it's the same reason as there being a correlation between being a scientist and being autistic. It turns out that autistic people are more resistant to social pressures, including the social pressure to follow the religion of a family that you belong to. Most religious people are simply people who adopt the religion of their family. Fine, okay. But autistic people are more likely to stop and question that. They're not so beholden to emotional reasoning when it comes to why you should believe. This is in general, this is not a complete rule, of course. They are more adherent to analytical reasoning, which is why, again, they are so prevalent in scientific fields. It doesn't really show anything negative, it just shows a lack of conformity in autistic people in general. So, as someone who came from the secular community and had seen this argument before, I realized like, oh, well, could it be the fact that autistic people are resistant to cis-normativity? Uh, for those who don't know what cis-normativity is, because it's very possible we have a couple of cis viewers in here, cis-normativity refers to the society's propensity to see everything through a cisgender, that is a cisgender lens. A cisgender person is the antonym to transgender, so someone who identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth. So society just assumes everyone is cisgender, and they try to coerce people into that. We see this in the hostility, the transphobia that trans people face, and even like with trans people, you can see it in the respectability politics. The whole idea that trans women need to go and be effeminate goddesses, and trans men need to be, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, style men sort of thing. You need to go hyper masculine or hyper feminine to sort of reassure cis society's gendered feelings. So, I was like, hey, could that be the reason? And I told myself, for this show, we are going to research that and we are going to look into that. I didn't have to do any research, really. Okay, I had to read some studies, which we'll get to in a second, but I was on YouTube when I noticed Vex Werewolf, she, her, posted an image which came from a book, Supporting Transgender Autistic Youth and Adults, a Guide for Professionals and Families, which stated, quote, "This research finds the autistic resistance to social conditioning appears to play an important role in the incidence of transgender identity. If this is true, then autistic rates or transgender incidence may represent true rates in the human population, rates which are suppressed in the neurotypical population due to their high susceptibility to social conditioning." So, taking that back to what we discussed earlier with transphobes and the narrative they like to spin, they've been pushing the idea that autistic people are gullible, childlike people, easy to mislead, easy to convince that they are trans when they're not. As this chapter points out, some research seems to suggest otherwise. And it's from here that I was able to find that research and read it for myself. The research in question came from a paper titled Gender Identity Differences in Autistic Adults, Associations with Perceptual and Social Cognitive Profiles. And it was published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders in 2018. Yeah. And like one thing I should just note here at the start is they noticed the fact that only 6% of the sample identified as a binary trans person, which is really interesting. And this is after they've gone ahead and selected just the trans people. Only 6% of the trans people that were autistic were binary trans people. So, Levi, you are a shiny. You are shiny. You are in the minority when it actually comes down to things, and that was just really interesting. I've got a few quotes here that I'm just going to read out quickly, and then we can unpack them further. The first one is, quote, "The finding that non-binary identities are most elevated seems to support hypotheses focused on autistic resistance to social conditioning, which are consistent with existing evidence of the same effect with respect to self-description of sexual orientation." Rudolph et al., 2017. "Perhaps elevated rates of trans identity in autism might result from a rejection of the binary cisgenderist norm, which, combined with below typical concern for social norms, could promote the disclosure of the new identity." End quote. Then we have, quote, "Learned patterns from the past, such as social norms, modeled as prior, are less significant in autistic people, and therefore attenuate extreme experience less." Wait. What's that word? I can't pronounce it. Is it attenuate?
What?
Attenuate. I will send you on.
Attenuate. I've never seen that
I
before.
should-
I'm going to Google it quickly.
Yes, I should probably do that as well. Attenuate.
I unfortunately cannot read.
Reduce the force. Okay, so it reduces. It's reduce. Okay. Attenuate. Reduce.
I really need to learn how to read IPA pronunciation. No, IPA. Sorry.
Anyway.
No, yeah, IPA. I need to learn how to
should
read the
get
IPA alphabet.
Sorry. And therefore reduce extreme experience loss, resulting in increased subjective salience. Palancio and Burr, 2012. End quote. Not all of that was quoted. Okay. And then I think it responds directly. And then quote, other authors, example, Ries et al. 2010, Jacobs et al. 2014, have discussed the possibility that rigid thinking in autism may lead individuals to misinterpret whatever gender nonconformity they experience as an indication that they are in the wrong gender. These hypotheses would be compatible with finding a selective elevation of autism traits, routine and switching on the AQ, and in the former touch sensitivity on the SPQ in our trans participants, which we did not find. However, to properly test this hypothesis, a rather higher degree of specificity would be needed in the measures to compensate for the heterogeneity of autistic and trans populations. The elevated rates of non-binary identities compared to the typical trans population also undermine these hypotheses. Okay, end quote. Okay. Sorry, that was a lot there. So pretty much from this research, from what we can see so far, again, this is just the start of the research. There's not really been much research into this previously. This is just the first step into building a consensus. But from what we can already see, the evidence doesn't really seem to match the narrative that autistic people are more likely to be trans because they are being brainwashed into thinking they are. All evidence seems to point to the contrary. It seems that so many autistic people are out about being trans, and that is a key distinction here. We're not actually talking about rates of transness, we're talking about being out about being trans. So many autistic people are out about being trans because they are resistant to the very social conditioning that the transphobic narrative is trying to paint as the origin for the trans epidemic of rapid onset gender dysphoria and shit like that. So it's quite interesting how this research has been out now for 3 years, and yet it's never taken into consideration by the bigots and transphobes out there. It's almost as if they just ignore the evidence that does not agree with their preconceived notions to try and paint this as some social contagion. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add on that.
Oh, yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, I have things to add. First of all, I think that this is interesting, not just in terms of the whole issue of rapid onset gender dysphoria and the trans discussion, but also more broadly than that. It raises a lot of questions about holistic supremacy and also neurotypical supremacy beyond that, in that it's assumed that whatever's going on in the neurotypical population or the holistic population is
bad.
It's whatever's happening. What's happening in the neurotypical population, that's normal, and anything that's happening in any neurodivergent population is deviant from that and not to be trusted and a problem and needs to conform to the neurotypical population. But we're seeing here, actually, the autistic population is showing more of what's normal and is closer to the real rates of transgender people than the neurotypical population, and the neurotypical population could actually stand to learn something from the autistic population.
And this is not the first time. I've actually got it mentions sexuality, and there was another study which was the sexual orientation in autism spectrum disorder, published in Autism Research in 2018. which found that in the group, sorry, quote, in the group with ASD, 69.7% of the sample reported being non-heterosexual, while in the TD group, 30.3% reported being non-heterosexual. The group with ASD reported higher rates of homosexuality, bisexuality, and asexuality, but lower rates of heterosexuality, end quote. And I'm reminded of there was a particular study, there was like a particular survey in the UK which asks youth, what your sexuality is. And the vast majority reported not heterosexual. And like the conservatives are like, what the hell is going on? What's happening here? And it's like, the train said hi. And it's like, how often you can end up using like the autism population and also different subcultures as well. There's a basis there that I'll go on to discuss in a second as sort of precursors that this sort of thing is coming is very interesting. And of course it comes to neurodivergence like autism, as discussed in the first study. It's a resistance to social conditioning, going against the grain, etc. When it comes to subcultures, and I'm sorry, I did subcultures as part of my sociology degree. I've got to talk about it. I also, before that, I was in the furry community, and I remember discussing the rates of bisexuality, which were exactly the same as that later UK government study on youth in the UK found out. But it turns out that if you belong to a marginalized community, which most subcultures are, goth, furry, etc., they're sort of seen as deviant because of the subculture they belong to. If you belong to one of these communities, you are more likely to be out about other social deviances, or what society sees as social deviances. Because once society's already demonized you in one way, a lot of people can take a sort of an attitude where they're like, well, I'm already demonized for this one thing, so may as well just live my life in regards to everything else.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
In for a penny, in for a pound. That's also why, when it comes to trans people, how many trans people are out as bisexual, gay, asexual, etc., and vice versa. So, it's just one of those cases where there's so many alternative explanations, because again, autistic people suffer incredible rates of ableist abuse. It's not just necessary resistance, it's also a rejection, an active stance against like assimilationist sort of rhetoric. I don't think it's any fucking coincidence that the two of us are running one of the very few anti-assimilationist trans shows on YouTube. So many of the trans shows that I've sort of looked into on YouTube, they're people who are like
stand ContraPoints.
Stand ContraPoints, that's for a start. But they're against neo-pronouns, they're for respectability politics, they're happy to turn a blind eye to abusers, etc.
It's any wonder they stand ContraPoints, who does all of those things.
Yeah. But I don't think it's like a coincidence that here we are sticking up to the
not doing those horrible
assimilationist sort of rhetoric. Which kind of nicely leads us into the next topic.
I still had more to say.
If you want to have more to say, then have your say.
One thing I was thinking about, since you brought up the thing of autistic people identifying as like minority sexualities, it's very this is kind of off topic, but I find it very, very interesting. You wouldn't have had this experience because you didn't grow up with a diagnosis. But for me, growing up with a diagnosis, I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old. There's this idea that because you're autistic, like you can't be, gay or bisexual or anything like that. Like queer autistic people don't exist. It doesn't. I don't really remember the logic anymore because
I
of
know
what.
some of the logic. Some of the logic is the idea that queer sexualities are adult and deviant. Uh,
Mm,
Autistic people are innocent and pure.
right. Yes, I remember now.
Is that
And
infantilizing that goes on?
yeah, and then there's also the idea of like something is already wrong with you, so you can't have another
Yeah.
thing wrong with you. Like you're already broken in one way. It'd be ridiculous for you to be broken in two. Um, what the reason why this is funny to me is because I never actually identified as straight at any point. I've identified as literally every other thing. I started off identifying as asexual, and then I was just confused for a while, and then I came out as trans, and then I started identifying as gay, and then I started identifying as bi last year, and then last year also I realized, oh, I'm actually also ace at the same time. So I've identified as everything except for straight. I just find it very funny.
Oh yeah, but like that belief that oh you like people who have never been ostracized in their life, like thinking oh everything you should want to be normal in like society's eye just kind of reminds me of the conversation I had with my father about my name the other day.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, I finally had a conversation with my dad since I changed my name on all my social media profiles, including Facebook, to Ethel, and I actually had a bit of a go at him because he decided to still dead name me. This is my first conversation since, and that was October last year. And he was talking to me about the fact that I didn't know this at the time. But I had a grand aunt, so my father's aunt, Ethel, and I did not know this. And he was like, yeah, but we thought like it was taken on as a joke because like, and he was describing Ethel and what she was like, and apparently she attended my grandmother's funeral. This is back in the 80s, 70s, wearing a black leather skirt, a like lipstick red top, and black fishnet stockings at a funeral. Which like you're supposed to wear all black business suits, and here she was dressed in what can best be described as like hooker attire for the time. And he was like, why would you pick this name? Why couldn't you pick another name? It's like, you believe me knowing this stuff would have made me pick any other name? You are completely out of touch. Because here's the thing, like, I know my grandmother would have loved the fact that her sister turned up like that. Like, a lot of people probably think, oh, that's quite disrespectful. No, she would have loved it, because my grandmother was not typical either. Very short hair, she was always working class, always dressed for comfort. There was an incident where she went to a restaurant with my grandfather and some friends, and they got kicked out because of the way she dressed, because she refused to wear like formal attire. She wasn't wearing a dress or anything, she was wearing jeans in this like really up posh thing. And they got fucking kicked out for it. So I was like, she wouldn't care. And then I discover like my other grand aunt, Edna, was apparently a witch. It's just like the three of these people, like, I swear there was a coven in this like red car, Middlesbrough. They were a power coven or whatever, but it's just like,
I'm going to say this for one friend in particular. You know who you are. Autistic Witch Coven. Let's make one.
it's just I'm finding all this stuff about my family. It's just oh god. It's like my dad like thinks if you knew about them you wouldn't have picked the name Ethel. It's like no, that's not how it's gonna work. Like that just makes it all the better now. Now I know like my dad's gonna cringe and my grandfather probably as well when they hear. But it's just I gave up like care. Like that's why I made the shift from allowing my old name, my dead name, and male pronouns to cutting them out of my life. Because I got fucking tired of trying to be respectable and non-threatening and stuff like that. I just made the decision, fuck it. Change it all. Just change it everywhere. No more of this, don't do that shit around me. That was what the the first thing my father told me when I told him I was trans, just fuck it all. If they can't handle it, then oh well, that's their issue. And like most of them have handled it absolutely fine. It's just my father who's the one who's been a bit of a dick.
We have someone offering to sign up to the Witch Coven.
Okay. Just gonna have a look.
I'm so tempted right now to jump into the Discord and make a new channel for it.
Apophysis, if you're still here. I found out I was autistic last April. And I've been open about this fact. I started working on the Autism Acceptance Month video, not looking at a load of things and going, huh.
Then of course that solid 2 or 3 months where every other word you said, I would be like, hey,
that's an autistic
that's an
thing.
autistic thing.
Yes. And another one was like today, it's like Adita was lecturing me, why don't you care about branding? It takes creativity. It's like, I don't give a shit about branding. It says nothing about the product. It's just...
Yeah.
Oh, but then I took a few tests and talked to a few professionals. Yeah, it just reached the conclusion.
And also, there was that one time when we were hanging out and like we're actually using video, which we've not done in forever. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, some of these gestures I've only seen from autistic people before. Just like, oh, okay, visual diagnosis by Dr. Bird. You have to rebrand to Dr. Bird now.
I hand stim, and I've been doing that for as long as I can remember. I also prolific nail biter until I got gender euphoria. I haven't done the nails. I'm sad. I'm sorry. I don't know if it was just related to COVID or if I just let them grow too long, but they just started breaking. So I just cut them all down, so like reset everything, and I just didn't have the time to paint them today. Found out I was autistic last April, and been sort of learning a lot about myself and looking back on things and realizing, oh, there's a reason. Okay. So